Believe it or not, there are still people in the world with such a limited cerebral activity that they think that the Lord of the Rings trilogy by Peter Jackson, the adaptation, is on par with the abomination that is called The Rings of Power by Prime Video. Hi everybody, and welcome to yet another video. Well, I didn't think I would have to address this again. Well, actually, I'm lying. I have been very well aware of the fact that this will have to be addressed in the future repeatedly over and over again, because the cerebral activity of certain people is not very high, is it? And there are going to be more and more nitwits out there. But then one has to think about the fact, is it really worth it to explain? No, it's not really worth to communicate with certain people, but it is fun to make these videos, so why not? I'm going to address this once again then, and approach the entire matter very simply and simplistically, as if I was talking about to nitwits. Of course, not all of you are nitwits, but there are certain that could be called so, such as a couple of people that have been discussing this matter on Twitter today under something that I tweeted, and that was, of course, concerning The Lord of the Rings by Peter Jackson and The Rings of Power and the comparison of the two. And there was a guy who has been for hours and hours arguing with some of my followers about the fact that apparently Peter Jackson insulted Tolkien in some way. And so once again, there has been this discussion between humans and an entity who has been trying to somehow fight for the Rings of Power by crapping on Peter Jackson's trilogy, not realizing, or realizing very well, that there is a vast difference between the two, but quite deliberately overseeing it or ignoring it and arguing with other people just for the sake of the argument itself. Now, we have to think about the fact that there is a vast difference between an adaptation and a pile of donkey manure. So what exactly is Peter Jackson's trilogy of The Lord of the Rings, I mean? Let us not talk about The Hobbit. That is a matter for another video. The Lord of the Rings, from the beginning of the 2000s, is a passion project. Now, as you can see on the screen, there is this little beautiful quote by Peter Jackson talking about the fact that they made the movies for Tolkien and that they were most certainly not going to put their own message, social political message into the movies. So these three films, the trilogy, the Lord of the Rings trilogy by Peter Jackson, is an adaptation of the novel The Lord of the Rings by John Ronald Reuel Tolkien. Now, as we very well know, adaptation is basically transformation of a story from one medium to another medium. Now, those two media in question are very often very different from each other and have to be approached differently. A novel is certainly very different from a movie, which is an audio-visual medium, and the story has to be told much more quickly than in the book. You can spend hours upon hours and days reading a particular book of circa 1400 pages in total, but you only have limited time to tell the story in the film. So it is necessary that certain things will have to be omitted. It is necessary that certain things will change, that certain things will, for example, certain lines will be put into the mouth of a different character from the character that spoke the lines originally in the book. Among other huge changes, let us just name a couple from the books into the films. The adding of the elven army coming to Helm's Deep, as far as omissions go, omitting basically the last chapters from The Lord of the Rings when Saruman tried to take over the Shire. Then, of course, all the slight tweaks and changes of the different individual characters, like the characterization of Aragorn and him being much less regal and much more of a ranger strider character in the Lord of the Rings movies, more of a like John Wayne in Middle-earth character than he was in the books. And then the omission of Tom Bombadil, and so on and so forth. Those are all very difficult choices that Peter Jackson had to make in order to make a movie that would, we have to remember, that would be for the wide audience. Those movies were to be released in cinema and theaters all around the world, and not everybody is a fan of the books. Not everybody is a Tolkien scholar. Not everybody is a fantasy aficionado. Not everybody will be acquainted with each and every single factoid found in the books. Ordinary people, normal people, fans of films in general, fans of fantasy movies, moviegoers will want to see something spectacular on screen. And Peter Jackson did most certainly achieve that. And it was awarded by the Academy when it still meant something, when those Academy Awards weren't just participation awards for inclusion, representation, and diversity, as they have evolved into nowadays. It still meant something that one evening, just one evening, 11 Oscars went to The Lord of the Rings, The Return of the King. And so those three movies are a massive filmmaking success, standing on their own. Now, looking past the fact that they are an adaptation of a source material, they are extremely well-made films cinematically. The direction is brilliant. The soundtrack is brilliant. The editing is brilliant. All the props and the armors and the costumes and the makeup, it's brilliantly produced, brilliantly made. All the practical effects for its time, the CGI was brilliant, in many cases much better than in movies made in 2022, 2023. Just please do compare the armor from the Lord of the Rings trilogy by Peter Jackson with all the armor from the Rings of Power. And looking past this, Peter Jackson managed to preserve the overall atmosphere, the core. Shall we say the message? But I don't think this is a proper word in this case. But the heart of the trilogy, or really of the novel, because Tolkien originally intended to publish it as just one book. It was only the publisher who told him, well, we should really divide it into a trilogy because people wouldn't read a book that is like 1,400 pages long. So he managed to do that. He managed to honor Professor. And a lot of people are saying, yes, but Christopher Tolkien didn't like the movies. And did you seriously expect him to like the films? If you were Tolkien, if you were Christopher Tolkien or John Ronald Reuel Tolkien, would you really like anything else but your own work? No. And it will be a tremendous insult to both Tolkiens to say that they should like the films. It is only good, it is only understandable, it is only right and correct that they would both hate those films. If both Tolkiens, and specifically then when Christopher Tolkien hated or didn't like the Lord of the Rings trilogy by Peter Jackson, what on earth do you think he would think about the Rings of Power? And I have expressed my feelings and the general facts about the Rings of Power multiple times before. Rings of Power is nothing else but a name that Prime Video, Amazon is milking in order to attract audience and make money. There is no resemblance with anything that Tolkien wrote. And even standing on its own, the show is very poorly made. The characters are bland and boring. Planks of wood. The story is boring. The pacing is slow. It's full of plot holes. The production overall is not very pleasing to the eye. It looks artificial. It looks insincere. This is the word I've been looking for. Sincerity. Sincere versus not sincere. The Lord of the Rings trilogy breathes with it being sincere. The Lord of the Rings trilogy by Peter Jackson breathes with passion and love for fantasy, for the fantasy genre, for Tolkien, for escapism. Whereas the Rings of Power is poorly made construct, poorly made product, poorly made content, a corporate content, and you can feel it. It is a cheap Chinese knockoff of a fantasy. And that is the main difference. Now, I don't know what else to say. If you still think that the Lord of the Rings trilogy by Peter Jackson as an adaptation is on par, on the same level as the abomination of the Rings of Power, I have nothing else to say to you. Goodbye. Have nice rest of your life, I suppose. Alright then. Let me know in the comments down below what you think, and that'll be all. Thank you very much for watching, and I'm out of here.